Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois. This week in the news, an article by Elizabeth Redden from Inside Higher Ed, Pandemic Hurt Student Mental Health. Mark and Anika will discuss the chapter, 32 Things Athletes Should Do to Get a Scholarship. Our question from a listener, should you take out a student loan to help establish good credit? And our interview is the final part with Gil Villanueva, Understanding the University of Richmond, which shall also serve as our college spotlight.
Good morning, friends. A few announcements. The first was, boy, what a debacle with the July ACT. My text was blowing up as person after person had story after story, some of them quite tragic, driving long hours because there was no test site center open, only to get to their hotel and find out the test had been canceled at the 11th hour. And that happened across the country. So I just want to encourage people to keep an eye on the testing policies for colleges, because the more complications that these schools have, the more you're going to see an increased number of schools going test optional. And the best way to do this, we mentioned this before, is go to appleroot.com and you'll see a link called Free Resources. And under the Free Resources tab, you'll see another link that says Admissions Testing Policy Updates in Response to COVID-19. And they're updating that daily at this point. But the next trend is to see the regional publics, which have so relied on testing, go test optional, at least for this year, and many of the flagships, which have relied more on test scores than your selected private universities. But so far, about a third of the flagships are test optional, with University of Maryland announcing this week, just to mention some of the other flagships that will be test optional for at least this up and coming year: University of Oregon, University of Washington, Utah, South Carolina, Minnesota, Virginia, UT Austin, Penn State, Indiana, Delaware, Rutgers, Connecticut, Illinois, Vermont, and UC Berkeley, to name some of them. So we're up to about 1/3. Now, the Common App opens tomorrow. So students, if you have not taken out an account at commonapp.org and a password, you want to do that. You want to enter all the colleges in that you are at least considering applying to and get to work on that Common App. And if you have not identified your recommendation writers, you want to go ahead and do that. Take advantage of the summer. Our up-and-coming Zoom session with Gil Villanueva, who is our interviewee right now, is only 10 days away, but you still have time to sign up. And you can do that by just going to yourcollegeboundkid.com, and you'll see the resources tab. And under the resources tab, you'll see a link that says Q&A with YCBK interviewees. For those of you who have already signed up, you should have received a Zoom invite link directly from the University of Richmond for that. If you haven't for some reason, please reach out to us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com, and we will make sure to facilitate that. That's all I got for today, Dave. Short and sweet. Other than, of course, I always forget this. I always have to have an admissions tip and an admissions vernacular. How many times have we recorded? And I said, Dave, I didn't give an admissions tip. I didn't give an admissions vernacular.
I know, because I already have Anika as a phone a friend.
Oh yeah. You're ready for the test. I always say, Dave, you want to take a stab at
it? That's right.
Okay, friends, for the admissions tip, and this is one I have to give credit to Rick Clark, my friend, director of admission at Georgia Tech. He gave me this idea, and I like it. So he says, when you're looking for a college, one thing to look at is what are the things I'm going to miss the most about my high school? And think about that, because that oftentimes will shed light on some of the cultural or just academic or other features that you will be most satisfied with in your college. So good question to ask yourself is, what will I miss most about my high school? And try to see if you can find those things in your college. And for the admissions vernacular, you ready, Dave?
I gotcha. I gotcha.
The word of the day is pseudo super score. Pseudo super score.
Pseudo super. Okay, I'm gonna use logic here. Super
You
score.
need to know what super score is, or you're dead meat. I can tell you that. That's my hint.
All right. Well, I know the super score is when you take parts of a given standardized test, like the math test and the English portion, and just take the highest of each section, even though they were taken at different times, and you can put them together into one score. So, but a pseudo super score. Man, you got me on the pseudo part. I'm not sure.
That's all right. At least you got the super score, right? So you get 50% bonus points there.
All right. Half a chicken dinner, man.
Half a chicken dinner. Half a steak dinner.
I get the prize.
By the way, Dave's treating me to steak dinner on August 8th. I'm already excited about it. Come in and stay, spending the night at our house. And we're looking forward to having Dave here in Georgia.
Get the reservations on the patio of Longhorn Steakhouse, man.
We're on, my friend. So let's give the answer, pseudo super score, because this is a tough one. So what happens is pretty large chunk or portion of of schools that take the ACT don't super score. And oftentimes this is frustrating to students because their ACT is their favorite test. And they know the SAT super scores, and they'll ask a college to use super score for the ACT. And they don't. And there's a lot of historical reasons why that's the case, although they're not very valid anymore, but a lot of schools have stuck to that based on history, that they don't super score for the ACT, but they do for the SAT. But what they'll often say is, well, we pseudo super score. And what they mean by that is, while we don't officially take your highest English and your highest reading, your highest science and your highest math and combine it into a super score, we still see that higher number when we're looking. And so we mentally take it into consideration. So that's pseudo super score. It's not officially doing it, but we still see, okay, you got a 27 overall, but you did get this 31 over here on this different administration. So it's like a de facto super score. Do you get it, Dave, or not? It's
like a wink and a nod. It's like, all right, we see you had the potential, even though it's not actually on the transcript here. So.
Absolutely. Okay. That was a tough one, man. I gave you PhD level at admissions vernacular.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
The article for this week is by Elizabeth Redden, Inside Higher Ed. Pandemic hurts student mental health. So there's a lot of statistics in this article, Mark. Why don't I start off with a brief summary, give the statistics, and we shall discuss.
Yeah, and make sure you talk about the survey that it was based on so people can know where the stats come from.
Yeah, we sure will. So this article discusses a new survey that found that students had difficulty accessing mental health care and experienced higher rates of depression post-COVID. And this survey comes from two organizations, the Healthy Minds Network for Research on Adolescent and Young Adult Mental Health, and the American College of Health Association. And it was a pretty extensive survey. It involved 18,764 students on 14 campuses. It was done on a several-month period early this spring, and here's what it found. It found that 60% of students in general find it harder to access mental health care since the start of this pandemic. 60% of students have more financial stress. 36% of students report that they had to find a new living situation because of COVID. 30% found that their mental health negatively affected their academic progress. That was compared to 22% before the pandemic. And they said that 26% were very concerned that they themselves would contract the virus, but 65% were very concerned that a person they knew would contract the virus. And then to round out these statistics, 5% felt that they personally experienced racial discrimination because of COVID, and 41% said they had witnessed some form of discrimination in person or online because of this pandemic. And in general, they said of the 42% of students who attempted to seek mental health care during the pandemic, 23% said that it was much more difficult, and 37% said it was somewhat more difficult since before the pandemic. And the overall concern that this article expressed at the end was because of the decreased financial resources and the increased stress that colleges are under because of the pandemic, that they fear that less resources will be given to mental health, even though there's clearly an increased need. So let me stop there, Mark, and throw it open to you for discussion.
Yeah, great summary, Dave. I'll talk a little bit about the genesis of this article, where this idea came. I was talking with one of my clients in Pennsylvania, actually doctor family, Dave, and they're a sporadic podcast listener. Like, they'll be like, Mark, you have an episode on this? They don't regularly listen. Actually, the daughter listens more than the parents. But I was having a conversation with the mom, and she was talking to me about the mental health strain and tension that this is taking on our youth. And she said to me, I'm sure you've been talking about this a lot on your podcast. And I thought, gee, we kind of haven't. Like, that would be a great topic. Like, we've talked about a lot of things, but we haven't really talked about on the podcast. Now, in fairness, she was primarily talking about seniors or rising college freshmen. In other words, not knowing, is my campus open? Is it not open? Is it online? Is it not online? Do I take a gap semester? Do I take a gap year? If I want to take it, how do I take it? Will they let me take it? Should I take it? If I don't take it, what will I do? What are all my options? All of that is very stressful. Now, this survey of over 18,000 people, of course, focused on current students and how they've been jockeyed around. And so we'll put our attention there, but it really underscored the fact that we need to talk about this because this is real. Like, change in and of itself is stressful for anybody, whether it's a new job or moving across country or, getting married or whatever. Change is stressful, but but what our 18, 19 to 22, 23-year-olds have had to go through is really a lot. And I think we need to, first of all, just acknowledge it. Just acknowledge it. But what I like about this article is it gets into the specifics. And you did a great job reading those stats, Dave. One other one that was in there, which is adding to the stress, and I'll read this. It says about 15% of students report having a probable case of COVID-19, right, though less than 1% of students said that they were actually had a diagnosis that was confirmed. So when you think about all the kids have had to go through, and just the financial piece alone, incredibly taxing. And then just the uncertainty piece. And then even the adjustment piece, all of a sudden coming home, having to learn to study online, take classes online. There's a lot we could say about this, whether it's current students or, current seniors. Obviously there's so much juniors, seniors, and college students have had to go through. But I think the first thing that comes to my mind just is us being mindful of this as parents, as educators, and being sensitive and then listening to them and listening to what they say and being understanding of all that they're experiencing, because this really is unlike anything that previous generations have had to go through. And so I think more than anything, I just want to heighten all of our sensitivity, myself included, and every parent included, to what their child is saying, and an attempt to listen to understand them. This is going off topic here, Dave, but it popped into my head. So, this, Dave, but I've got all this stuff all over the house now, plaques and things in our home. And one of them that I just ordered is a Maya Angelou quote. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Good quote.
And yeah, and no, that just jumps out to me right now. And this day, because more than anything, my takeaway from this article is for us to seek to understand, seek to listen to our kids to understand what they're going through. And it's easy to have a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, why, study harder, or don't be so lazy, or get your act together, or stop making excuses. And this is just not the time for that. This is a time to really try to understand, because they're going through a lot. Now, let me ask you this. Of all those stats, Dave, that you read, were there any one or two that kind of jumped off the page at you?
Well, the one that brought the take home that 60% are basically under mental stress.
Yeah.
Resonates, because I think that same stat applies to this whole country. Mark, I can tell you that just yesterday I was listening to one of these talk shows, and they talked about how people in this country are sort of losing it, that they're under stress every single day. That domestic violence inside of homes is up, that alcohol and drug abuse is up, that reported cases of suicide and depression in the general population is up. Mark, you know that it's very hard to turn on the TV without seeing some form of negative images that we've never seen before, whether it is masked federal agents snatching people off the street and throwing them into unmarked vans in Portland. And so I think we are under significant stress. And you exacerbate that by young people who don't have the life experience to know how to handle a lot of these things, and have the added uncertainties of being in the initial part of their careers and trying to figure so many things out. So I think that this whole article is consistent with the zeitgeist of uncertainty and stress that we're all under right now.
And I'm really glad you went there, Dave, because obviously you went big, broad picture, macro. You went macro on us, which is fine. But what resonates with me with what you said is the parent stress in the college process.
Yes.
The parent stress in the college process as high. Like you said, there may be more facility. That muscle's been developed a little bit more over time through life compared to kids. But the stress with parents, can I afford it? Am I making a mistake allowing my kid to go into an environment where they may get COVID and bring it home, or they die, or they get very sick, on and on and on and on. Academics. How's my kid going to do in this new online situation? And are they going to blow their GPA and hinder their chances at med school and law school and grad school and getting a job? And how much do I lean on them versus give them space? There's a lot of stress. Mental health resources have never been more needed on the college campus, but they may end up being cut now as part of budgetary constraints.
That's right.
And so I think what would you say our takeaways, Dave, for this article are?
Well, there's several takeaways. The first thing is acknowledging that each one of our kids is going to probably require extra attention and care and observation to look for signs of potential depression and stress. In a context in pre-COVID, the suicide rates, depression rates, and mental health rates of kids were already skyrocketing. See, the context in this is it's not like we were starting from a totally mellow baseline where everything was hunky-dory and kids were doing great. Mark, prior to this, we were already discussing about skyrocketing cases of depression and stress among kids.
Yeah, that's
and
a
now
really
you
good
have
point.
this added stressor. So, it's incumbent on us to be extra vigilant with our own kids and our own selves to see how we're responding to this stress situation. But I think the other thing that is not mentioned in the article is that if we see it, it's important to start realizing that we're going to need to figure out how to access additional resources to bear, to help each one of us cope with this. If the schools are going to be cutting back on mental health resources, how can we as individuals fill in the gap if we see our own kids succumbing to some of this pressure?
Yeah, and I think, when I look at what we as parents can do, I just want to emphasize one word, and that is unconditional acceptance.
Yes.
Unconditional acceptance. Because one of the things that really makes for a toxic brew is when you combine this level of stress with a kid that might have some perfectionistic orientation, and a type A parent that's driving them. And that's what makes for a real toxic brew, because then things can really spiral out of control, and the student can start feeling hopelessness. That's when really bad things can happen,
Right.
And so there's going to need to be some more tolerance. And we talked already about seeking to understand.
Yeah.
That's already extremely important. And this is hard because Dave and I have talked about this. Dave and I are both type A driver types. We really are. And so when that's how you think, your own self, you're wired that way. It's just so easy to apply, that prism through how you see the world, because that's just how you think.
Yes, correct.
And so if that's who you are, and Dave and I are speaking as two type A driven types, you got to check yourself sometimes, because it just may not be appropriate to crack the whip on your kid, proverbially. And I'm talking proverbially,
And if I can just add one more thing that I was very mindful of, this article references that 36% of kids, because of COVID, had to seek new living situations. My daughter reminded me of how extremely stressful that has been for many of her classmates. I made the assumption that, kids would just want to stay home, because who wants to go back to college when you can't do X, Y, and Z? But she pointed out to me that many of her classmates have dysfunctional home situations, or they have home situations where there might be several kids living in an overcrowded situation, and that college was a sanctuary, a relief to them. And so just the whole fact of not being able to go back to that sanctuary, or not being able to reconnect with the friends that they made and the comforts of their new living situation itself has been a really major stressor. So, I think that's something we have to be mindful of as well. Whether your kid stays home or go back to school, the whole milieu that they have been used to is going to be changed in some fundamental way that really adds to the stress.
Dave, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I've been thinking a lot about what I shared last week, where, I tried to strike a balance between saying that this is an individual decision, whether or not your child, goes and lives in the dorms in the midst of what's going on right now. And I said, but personally, if you want to know my opinion, I wouldn't have my kid in the dorm. I just want to let you know my opinion. But I felt comfortable with that through the week, because there's just so many different situations. And one of them is, what is going to be the home environment? Is it going to be World War III? And so I don't necessarily regret, because I do want to let people know what I think. But I think what I really want to emphasize is, it's just such a customized, unique, personal, individual decision for everybody. And that has to trump all factors. Now, we're kind of vacillating this conversation between the stress on a current junior, a senior, and the expense they're experiencing with all the uncertainty. Because we haven't even gotten into that, Dave. Obviously the junior class, I can't even begin to tell you, the rising seniors, how stressful it's been, literally having every ACT and SAT canceled on you after you prepped really, really hard. Right. Not being able to visit colleges, having all your plans changed as a result of that, having your internship and all your summer plans completely changed, and now not knowing what to do, and now wondering if your extracurriculars are going to look weak and it's going to hinder your ability to get into college. And Mark, all of those factors have been incredibly stressful on the rising senior class. So this is really hitting the rising seniors, the rising freshmen, and the current college students, the stress, and their parents.
And another cohort we haven't talked about, But it's just come to my attention talking to my neighbor kids. What about all the rising college juniors and seniors? Their whole job opportunities, internships have been completely wiped out. There are kids who were set working summer internships, graduating this year, hoping to start right into the labor force, and the economy is wrecked. And their whole life has been put on pause. And, we're talking about kids who are talking about going back to college. Well, there's a whole bunch of seniors who just graduated who are at home doing nothing because their whole plans have been put on permanent pause. And their whole life trajectory has been altered because they can't go to the next step. So just stress all around,
Yeah. And just to show how far that permeates. So my very, very next door neighbor, Delaney, she just graduated from the University of Miami and public health, and she got a job in Kansas City. But now there's all kinds of issues with what's going on. Is she going to start out remote? Is she going to have to go there? What's the transportation situation? What's the work situation like? Adjusting into a community when you're remote. And she's like, I'm actually looking to see if I can do something at the CDC here in Atlanta now, because this is crazy. And so this is somebody who got a really good job, graduating out of college, and, scheduled to start in late August. And there's complications with that as a result of this. So it really, really does impact everybody.
Yes, it really does.
And I think that, it's a good discussion, Dave. I've enjoyed it. Yeah. The one thing I do want to say too is that there's a magnified degree of stress for anybody that is experiencing financial ramifications of COVID.
Yes.
Whether that's the parent who doesn't know how they can afford college now, or the student that doesn't know how to afford if they can stay. Yeah. The student that, got to move out of the dorms because they can't afford it, or, gee, I'm looking for loans. Or, as one student was telling me recently, they've changed my financial package from last year till this year. I don't know how I'm going to do it. And the article talks about that. There's a whole different level of stress that families that are experiencing financial problems, which are quite a few. Yeah. Not everybody, but it's quite a few, because it could, even if your situation is okay, I can afford it, but boy, am I ever tapping into my emergency savings. Yeah. That's still a form of stress.
Yeah.
So I just want to be particularly sensitive to that particular family.
Yeah. And you don't have to add this to the podcast, but just another personal anecdote I can tell you is that I'm seeing so many applications of students who primarily would have been able to qualify for student living because they had a job. But think about it. The restaurants and the service industries and all these things, these are the bread and butter of student jobs, which enables them to be able to afford to live in these apartments. They're the ones that are unemployed. Now you have a lot of students who are applying saying, I have $600 unemployment, which is now my proof of income, and they can no longer qualify for living. So it's just another stressor that they have,
I hear you.
Yeah.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, Anika, what's going on with Janaea and track? Because I remember ever since I knew her, she was going to run track in college. And she was like a superstar when she got to boarding school. And then she cooled on it. And every time I talk to you, you're running her around in track practice. So it seems like she's 8:30, 9:30, 10 o'clock. She's at track practice.
Well, but I got to autocorrect because actually she never talked about running in college. It was all about high school. So people assume that she wanted to run for college. And, when she got to George School, they're not the most competitive school, sports school.
Being so kind. They're
not. So it was.
I know they're not. That's
the training lag.
They suck. They suck. Politically correct.
Excellent school, by the way, but the sports suck. And so
I know.
It took away from her training and all that. And she wasn't, all gung ho to run in college. And so we met, since we've been home, she met this guy on this track. We go, COVID hit. All you can do is go to a track and walk around and you see people. But this guy is out there training all these athletes. And, long story short, she started working out with him, and he's really good. He's really good. And he's kind of slick trying to convince her to, still try to walk on the track team at A&T. But I, slick, don't want her to at all. And she's like, so I'm hoping she's going to stay in that lane. And, she's got all these other obligations she's got now. So
she probably won't. There's just too many other things you can do with your time.
Yeah.
Unless you
and that obligation
know that you want to do it.
Yeah.
Good for her, though, for staying in shape like that.
Yeah. And she and it's so funny. She ran a track meet. And so this guy comes up to her. He's like, man, you're in distance and da-da-da-da. And you get a scholarship. She's like, oh, well, I got a scholarship. But I will work on that time. Thank you.
Just so humble. She got a full cost of attendance. I'm playing in 0.
Right.
I am one of like the 0.3% of people that gets it.
That'd be people, but that's the assumption is that, oh, you're going for a scholarship. No, actually, I'm not, but I do enjoy running, by the way. So, yeah.
You got it like that. You're loaded. All right. Speaking about that, that's a good segue because, as you know, Anika, this is the longest chapter in my entire book. There's no way in the world that we can talk. Yes. So, this chapter looks at 33 things that athletes should do if they want to get a scholarship or really compete. It includes both getting a scholarship as well as just if they want to compete and make a team. And there's a lot of things in here. So there's no way we're going through 33. But I would say if you're an athlete, this is a chapter that you really are going to want to read if you
definitely want to read this if you're an athlete planning to run run in college, planning to do your sport in college.
Yes, you all got running on the mind. There are other sports besides running.
Is it?
So I think we talked ahead of time, and I think the way we said we're just going to try to tackle this behemoth of a chapter is. You pick 3 things that popped out for you, and I'm going to select 3 things you don't take that I think are very important. And, who knows, maybe I'll sneak a 4th in there. But what are some things that jumped out to you about this chapter, Anika, that athletes need to do?
So I want to dive down, beyond the how you get, your prep and putting all the time in and all that stuff. I like the points you make toward the end where you say the first one that stood out to me is knowing that this is big business and coaches will try to recruit over you. I think those are the conversations that I would like to hear more about. Because every time somebody sees you playing anything, it's like, oh, you want to get a scholarship and da-da-da, but they don't talk about like the hard part of it. And I feel like that's a hard part.
Yeah. I'll tell a quick story about this. So one of the students I worked with back in 2005, his name was Dockery Walker. Okay. 6'7", he's from Delaware and very talented. And he had the mindset of, I want to play basketball. I want to go to the best academic school in the world I can go to. And so he set his mind to do that. Now, his parents were in complete agreement with that. Why? His dad and mom, they met at Clemson. His dad played basketball at Clemson. His mom played volleyball at Clemson. And to this day, they're both in full-time college athletics for a job. So the dad was a coach at Delaware State and the mom coached. And they all as a family, we all agreed sitting down. They're like, listen, this is big business. Everybody's going to promise the world to my son. And then they'll go out and promise the world to everybody else. And he'll be sitting on the bench and he won't play and they'll recruit over him. But we've got a plan. We're going to outsmart them. We're going to go to a school that's the best academic school he can possibly get in. But he's going to be too good of a recruit for them to recruit over him. So that's what he did. He went to Brown University. He started as a freshman. Because he was such a big recruit for them, like he was a big fish for Brown to catch that they actually couldn't recruit over him because they really couldn't pull in players that were better than him. That, in my opinion, is a smart way to handle that process. I don't know if I touched on the part you wanted to talk about, but there's another component too, which is coaches can promise and promise and promise, and coaches aren't the ones. Oftentimes, it depends on the sport that admissions has to make the offer. Now, it gets tricky because there are sports where coaches get slots and there's other sports and there's other schools where coaches need to get stuff through the admission office. But anyway, did you want to talk about that or another component?
No. I think that's a great component. And I think that, going into my next one that stood out to me, and speaking of coaches, is that you say to remember that the nicest coaches can become different when they're under pressure or, when they have to, they're under pressure, you either win or you get fired. So this awesome person that's been your advocate for so long could just turn into your arch nemesis, I guess.
No, that happens all the time. In fact, I'm not going to mention the last name, but I'll say there's a player named Houston, also a basketball player. And he went to a big time school. I'll just say it was a SEC school. So, it was big time. And I was talking to him and he was like, oh my goodness, that coach was like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I don't even recognize this guy anymore. He yells, he screams. He was the nicest person in the world. So there's a lot of pressure. If they don't win, they get fired. And that's challenging. The first basketball coach that Joy ever had, this is in the third grade. She was playing on a fifth grade team in the third grade in Pennsylvania. And the coach had gone to William & Mary and played at William & Mary. Now, William & Mary is still one of the more academic schools. But the coach said, she had two kids that were also on the team. She said, my kids they'd have a fight on their hands with me in order to allow me to let them play D1. And the reason why is because she had four or five surgeries when she played at William & Mary. And the coaches, were making her get out there and play, even that she hadn't fully rehabilitated.
Oh, goodness. Wow.
And she's like, I'm fortunate that I can walk right now. But there was so much pressure for them to win and for them to squeeze every drop of juice out of that scholarship they had given her, that they were recommending things that were not in her best health interest. Now, not everybody does that. I don't want to stereotype, but I will say this, it's very common.
Right.
And the other thing that's very common is if you look at the turnover rate of coaches. So one of the mistakes people make, and this is really hard because players bond with coaches. They connect with coaches. They're the school. They're the face of the school. And depending on the sport, they may literally be texting you every single day. Mm-hmm. And so they're the school to you. And then you go there and then they leave. And that happens all the time. So I talk about that as well. Like, as hard as it is, you really shouldn't pick a place because of the coach, because you should almost expect that they're probably not going to be there for your whole 4 years.
That's interesting.
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com.
And I wanted to touch on this one because this next one, because obviously we're not an athletic going to college family, but I wonder how many of these athletes know how early, this process actually begins. Yeah. And so there are actually a couple in here that speak to this, but this one in particular, this one point specifically says if a school is not reaching out to you by junior year after you've reached out to them, they're not interested. And you also have another one early on that talks about, it's the spring of your 9th grade, that you should be doing stuff. So I just wonder if every athlete who truly wants to do this or, pursue the sports, if they understand how long this process actually is.
I'm glad you brought that point up, because what I will tell you is that every sport has a different time frame, and the higher the level, the earlier it starts. Right. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about high D1, because there's so many levels out there, right? There's D1, there's D2, there's D3, there's NAIA, and then there's within each level, there's being a high major, a mid major, and a low major, all within that tier. So there's lots of different levels. Okay. And depending on the sport and depending on the level can determine when the recruiting starts. So that's that's one of the things I want to emphasize as well, is that you need to know the timeline for your sport, and you need to know the procedures and the policies, because there's dead periods when coaches can't contact you, and there's other times when they can contact you. You really should know that calendar. You should know it well. And ncaa.org is probably the best place to go. They have really good information on all that, because they break it down depending on the division, and you can see the different timelines. But I think I went in a direction you didn't want to go on that.
No, you did. You did great again. Nope, that was it again. And here's this last one I want to mention, Mark.
Sure. And you're going to sneak up for a thing, because I probably will too. So
you know it. So it's another one in here where you say, it's really smart for these students to ask the coach the hard questions. Where am I on your recruitment list? How many students have transferred in the last 3 years, and why have they transferred?
Yep.
So it's that I feel like that was a really important point as well.
No, that's very important. And also not just talk to the coach, but other people around, like other people, including athletes on the program, parents of athletes, past athletes that have graduated. Like, you really want to do your homework, and when you ask those kinds of questions. Any more, or is those your main ones?
We got 33 on here. You got a whole lot of good stuff here. So I'm just going to stop there. Go ahead and pick your 3.
Well, some of the ones that I feel come up the most. The way I approach things like this are, what are the biggest problems that I see when I see an athlete that wants to play college and they don't end up playing college? Like, what are the reasons why they don't end up going, or they don't end up going where they think they're going to go? And so for me, one of the first things that's really important is that you have to be able to get an assessment of what level you can play at. It reminds me a lot about what we talked about in the last episode, Anika, about people not being able to properly ascertain the colleges that they're competitive with from an academic standpoint. That happens all the time with athletics as well. People get caught up in the glamour of going D1. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, it's not a lot of fun when you're sitting on a bench after getting up at 4 a.m. to go to practice, and you sit on a bench and you never play. It's amazing. Joy, this. Joy was on a very, very high level team in 7th grade. Her team was second ranked in the state, and 7 players on her team played Division I basketball. And, of course, we've kept in touch with what happened to those players. Many of them have transferred. Many of them were not happy. Many of them were not satisfied. One of them played 12 minutes the whole season.
Oh, wow.
Another one played 31 minutes, because they got caught up in the allure of the name. They went to a place, and then they didn't play much, and then they realized that glamour goes away real fast. But you have to be able to assess what level you can either get a scholarship or make it as a preferred walk-on, and what level you can actually play. And that's actually really hard to do, because a lot of times the system around you, depending on your sport, it may not tell you what you need to hear. Case in point. One of the reasons why Joy and I had so much of a fallout is everybody around her was telling her she was a Division I basketball player. Okay. And I knew Joy. She was a rock star in high school. Like, even in 8th grade, her first game in 8th grade, they moved her up to high school, and she scored 37 points and outscored the whole team. Yeah, their team went 42-28, and she had 37 as an 8th grader. So she was a rock star. But I knew her. She wasn't going to be happy if she wasn't going to play a lot. So she could maybe make a D1 team like those other players on her team, but she wouldn't be happy not playing a lot. I know her. So I would speak out to her about that. And that was really a lot of tension. It's really bad when your dad doesn't believe in you, because, Joy doesn't bite her tongue. But
good for her.
That was hard. But here's the problem. All of the AAU teams were telling her that as well, because they wanted to keep. So what happens, and I've seen this happen a lot. Let's say an AAU coach says to a player, I really think you'd be best off at Division III or low D2. Then the parents get frustrated because they have unrealistic expectations. They think you don't believe in my kid. Then they quit and go to another team. So coaches don't want that to happen. So they're incentivized to make you feel that you can compete at a level that you maybe can't.
Oh man.
So it's very difficult, but you have to be able to do it. And, I don't know if we have time to talk about how you do it, but it's very, very, very important. There are a lot of different ways that you can do it, but you have to be able to get an objective read at the level that you can play it, because that will impact your whole entire strategy of, depending on the sport. So that's one thing. Another thing that I would say is you need to learn the process for each sport. Some sports are time-based sports. Okay. If I'm working with a student and they're a swimmer, or cross-country runner or track, that's all a time-based sport. There are other sports, it's more about what is your state ranking. Okay. And there's other sports that are more showcase sports. You got to go to the certain showcases and you got to perform and do well on them. Okay. So you've got to be able to know the process for each sport and the timeline. That's very, very, very important. Another thing that's extremely important, and these are just mistakes that I see people make. That's why I'm approaching this question, Nico. What are the biggest mistakes? The other is, if you think about it, you're a coach. Okay. You need talent. Well, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of players out there. You don't have the time or the manpower to go check out everybody. So you know what they rely on? And now it's a little different for football because there's so much money in football and basketball that, they can afford to, have lots of people out there scouring the country and doing a lot of things. But even there, this still works. They rely on people to reach out to them. And so many people expect sitting at home waiting for their scholarship offer to drop out of the heaven or appear in their mailbox. And the most important thing that an athlete can do after they self-assess and they figure out the exact level that they can and play at is to proactively recruit the college. That's what you want to do. There's so many steps involved in that, from filling out the recruitment questionnaire to putting together your athletic resume. And then I cannot stress this, for most sports, it's so important that you have quality film. Film is extremely important. It varies from sport to sport how important it is, but film for a lot of sports is critical. And so, we could go on and on and on, but to me, those are the biggest mistakes I see people make, is they're not able to accurately assess the level that they can play at. Okay. And they overestimate, by the way. They're not proactive enough. And they don't know how to, not only do they not understand that they need to be an initiator and reach out, they don't know how to properly reach out and initiate, how to contact, who to contact, what documents and evidence and proof that they should have of their level, and so there's a lot involved in that, from film to resumes to references to coaches' letters to, showing up at the right events and clinics. There's just a lot involved. And so those are, I could literally talk to you about this topic all night. Every year I work with a lot of athletes, and I actually, ran track in Michigan State. So, back in the 80s, make sure that you love it, not like it, but love it. This is why when you're talking about Nate, I was like, I don't think she should, because when you get to college, there's so many things to do.
And love the sport is what you're saying, not the
Correct.
sport, the sport itself.
Correct. Yes. Because, there's so many things to do, and you have so many choices. The luster of all that hard work that you have to do, if you don't love it, I'm telling you, you're not going to last. Or if you do, you'll have a miserable experience. Some of Joy's friends are sticking with their experience, but they don't like it. It's like a job, and they don't like it. And, it's like, this isn't like high school. It's not like, it's just like a job. I'm just getting a job. Yeah, I get a scholarship, but it's like, I'll be so glad when it's over. Then there are people that love it, and they're like a fish in the water, and they're doing it. And it's very important that you do that. And if you don't absolutely love it, then I would tell you, there's other levels. Like, we're talking about varsity, right? But a lot of schools have club sport.
Yeah, I was so fascinated to see all these intramural sports now. I think that's so awesome.
Intramural's been around a long time, but do you know the difference between club and intramural?
Well, I did consider them one and the same.
No. So club is like in between varsity and intramural. So with club, you still are playing, even traveling out of state sometimes.
You know what? A&T does have club sports too. You're right.
Yeah.
And they have uniforms and everything, but they're not the VAR. Like you said, they're not the VAR. Yeah.
Correct.
But I just love the range though. Because we just didn't know that back in the day. Yeah. I do love that.
It can be great. because a lot of people like it a lot and they still want to do it, but either intramural or club is just a great level for them.
Yeah.
They don't have to do the varsity. So there's so much more we could talk about athletic recruiting. I feel like we're doing an injustice to literally have one chapter, but maybe if listeners out there have questions, specific questions about athletic recruitment, they can send them in and we can get them onto, some questions from the listener.
Or just
I think we hit some of the key
chapter
points.
131.
I just kept going and adding more and more and more points. I was like, I could make this 3 chapters or jam it in one.
Well, you are a basketball head, so it's kind of in your blood a little bit.
I like all sports. I mean, I like golf.
But you love basketball.
I do. I mean, you know what? It's funny. I don't like sports as much as I used to. Like when I was a kid, like literally anything. Like I can't do baseball now. I can't do ice hockey. Like I can't do those sports are boring to me now.
Yeah.
But I can do basketball and I can do football and I can do golf and I can do track and I can do most of them, to tell you the truth.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Anika, what a question from a listener. College counselor question today.
Yeah, we got one from Miss Michele. She's a counselor in Washington. And I'm going to read her verbatim here. Let's see. She says, I have a question for you about a recent comment you made on a previous episode. You mentioned that it can be beneficial for a student to take out a small student loan in order to establish credit. I wonder if you could provide some more insight into this process. When does the establishment of good credit actually start happening? Since the student will not actually begin payment on their loan until after they graduate. Are they awarded the credit status simply for having a loan? Or does the benefit come far off into the future when they start payments on the loan? So this is a forward-thinking action to facilitate our kids' ability to get a loan for a home or something like that. And what is the minimum amount of a student loan that you would suggest if a student is taking out the loan solely for this purpose?
Great questions. Thank you, Michele. So first of all, just a little background. I would never say everybody has to take out a student loan. And some people are just, philosophically opposed to it. And I get that. But there definitely are some advantages, but before we do, let's just do a little bit of an overview about loans. So student loans are what are considered installment loans. Okay. And by an installment loan, I mean, there's a starting balance and you've got a fixed number of payments. And that's very similar to, auto loans. They're considered installment loans. Mortgage loans are considered installment loans. The other main type of loan that people think about are revolving loans. And that would be like things like a HELOC or a personal line of credit, a gas card, or the most famous would be a credit card. And it's important. Those are different. So student loans as installment loans, they don't have their own category, their own special consideration, whether they're private loans or state loans or federal loans, they're all treated the same. But the thing about them is they impact your debt usage in a different kind of way. So, for example, when you're looking at your credit score, 30% of your credit score is made up of what's known as your credit utilization rate. So you think having a $50,000, loan balance, that's a really big loan balance, but that can be pretty devastating on a credit card. But 7% of people with $50,000 in student loans still have over 800 on their credit score. So it doesn't impact your debt utilization the same way. Now it can impact your debt income ratio. Okay. That is one of the factors, your debt income ratio, and student loans do impact you that way. I'm just giving you kind of the overview, first of all, when you look at student loans. And of course, late payments are going to ding your score. So you obviously you want to definitely avoid that. And certainly a default is definitely going to hurt you. But let's talk about the positive ways in which student loans can help you. One, student loans actually can boost what's known as your credit mix. Now, when you look at credit scores, credit mix is only 10% of the formula that's used. And credit mix is the different types of loans you have. So actually having a mixture of installment loans and revolving loans is credit mix. And that's one of the factors that's used into assessing what your credit score is. So that's one thing. It can help you with your credit mix. Secondly, student loans, and this is really important, they can establish credit history. So getting into the question that Michele asks, I think she's assuming that you get the student loan and you don't start making payments until 6 months after you graduate, which is what most people do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not what you have to do. In fact, it's not what I recommend. I actually recommend, I recommend that people, and I just talked to Joy about this just 3 days ago. I recommend that people start making payments on their loans while they're in college. And why do you think I would recommend that, Anika?
Well, is it to the point of establishing the credit? Or, I mean, obviously you're trying to get it over early too, but is it for the benefit of the credit establishment?
There's three reasons. One, and this is partly to answer Michele's question, as soon as you start making payments, now you're establishing a track record of credit history, and that helps you long-term for build your credit score. Mm-hmm. So you could have a 4-year credit history if you make payments throughout the time you're in college that somebody else doesn't have that doesn't do that. So that's one thing. Secondly, it reminds people they have loans. A lot of times people forget they have loans and they graduate and then, oh my goodness, I got $30,000 in loans. Oh my goodness, So it reminds you that you have loans. And then also you can significantly reduce your interest by making payments. Okay. And making payments will reduce your interest rate quite a bit. Remember, unsubsidized loans, you go on the clock immediately. The interest starts accruing right away. It's only subsidized where the interest doesn't start till after graduation. So you can significantly reduce that compound interest effect. So you're reducing your loan in a pretty significant way. Okay, you're establishing credit history, and it keeps you cognizant of the fact that I've taken out this responsibility. So there's one organization I work with, and they only they require everybody who gets one of their loans to start making payments right away, even if it's $10 a month. So that leads into another one of questions Michele has. How much do I recommend? You can do a small amount. You can do $1,000. You take out $1,000 loan. And start making payments on it. It'll establish a credit history. Just like when people take out like a $1,000 credit card, that builds a credit history. And then the other thing it does is it also, the length of your credit history actually counts for 15% of your credit score. So you're establishing history. You have a longer history. And so I'm an advocate of it. I think it teaches responsibility. It lets people know their skin in the game. And I think it's a good thing. But what I would say is if not everybody has to do this, because for some people it feels like a burden. You know what I mean? It feels like I'm in debt. And I don't want that feeling of being in debt. And if that's how you feel, then I would just say don't do it,
Yeah, but here's the thing though, Mark. Aren't you talking to the parent at this point? Because the child hasn't started working yet. So if they're still in college.
No. So if you take out, this is a student loan, so it's in the student's name, right? A lot of students have a job between working through the school year or working the summer. They have a job. At some point they're making money. Yeah. The majority of students work at some point when they go through school. You should know, Miss, work 40 hours a week all through the night.
I feel like I work more than I went to school, so that's a bad analogy. But what I'm saying is that okay, if the student, I don't know, because I don't know, you're the one that deals with all these families, but if my child is in school and they're working, I'm assuming that that's for their living expenses. They're trying to buy food. They're trying to survive to make sure that they are maintaining some sanity as they're working through this degree. So I don't know. It seems a little scary to.
I'm talking about really small amounts, Anika. So if you take out, let's say you take out $1,000 loan. So I think that's where we parted, because I'm not thinking about the small loan. I'm thinking about the kids who have the serious loans. No. So, because my understanding of Michele's question was, what's the advantage to taking out a loan?
Oh, if you don't have to. Okay, so yes. we're just dealing with those folks, period. Okay. Correct. Let me just step away then.
Yeah, so let's say you had $1,000 loan, okay? So $1,000 loan times 4 is $4,000. Right now, at the current interest rates, if they stay around where they are, that would be a payment in the 30s a month. That's 6 months after graduation. But, that would be a 10-year payment of like $30-some a month. Okay? But you can easily bang out a big portion of that by doing $10 a month while you're in school. and you end up with 4 years more of credit history. You lengthen your credit history. You begin to learn some responsibility. You decrease your interest. I'm a fan. I'm an advocate of it. But I'm also respectful of people who feel like loan feels like bondage. I want to feel free. It's something that I discuss with people and kind of go over the pros and the cons. And some people like the idea of accelerating and building the credit. And some people just feel like, it feels like bondage to them. And that's a very personal decision, It's a lot like your own mortgage. Like you could make a case. Some people, hey, get the mortgage paid off as soon as possible, even if you have a really, really low interest rate, and then other people are like, hey, if your interest rate is really, really low, and if you itemize, like for example, on my mortgage, my interest rate is 2.62%. 2.62%. So I'm actually, and I itemize every year. So, now there's like $24,000 standard deduction for married filing joint, but I have more than that in deductions. So I itemize. So I'm able to claim my mortgage basically, as the interest on the mortgage, property tax, I'm able to claim all that. And I'm better off actually investing that money than just accelerating and paying it off right away. I can get a better return, but there's another person that says, well, I just want the peace of mind of paying it off. Like, I don't like that. And it's not a right or wrong. It's really a personal thing. Okay. What are you thinking over there in Greensboro? Can I say Greensboro? You're not in Greensboro.
I work in Greensboro, live in McLeansville now.
You keep moving. I can't keep track of you.
That's how.
Remember when you lived in that place? Not Elon. You were there for
Burlington,
a little minute.
Close to Elon. And I actually kind of liked it out there. I really did. But we were in a park.
You complained about how country it was.
No. Not in that little circle. Not in that little area. Once we got out
there. That was the second one.
Yeah,
that was the first place you went to.
That first one was, I really liked
the place where when I sent you $50 of supplies and they lost them. Remember that in the mail? It's so hick in the middle of nowhere.
I can't remember, but I'm going to be moving again soon,
I remember.
So get used to it.
How can you do that? Like, I hate moving with a passion.
Well, I'm a minimalist, so they have no idea how much stuff I've thrown away. And,
you're an Anitra. Anitra will tell me she threw my stuff out. I'm like, you have no right to throw my stuff out.
Hey, if you weren't looking for it over the past year, chances are you didn't need it.
You sound just like her. Goodness. So what do you do? Just keep getting better places, like more space or better price or closer to work? What's the deal?
The last place was so John could get in a certain school. So that was our whole purpose was to get in that school because that was our biggest challenge. That was
and then you didn't like the school when you got there.
No. This is the school that we did like.
A different school.
So it was it was that first school that he went to. The charter school that was similar, to KIPP. It did not turn out to be that way. So we tried that and that did not work out at all. So we moved to get in this school. And then once you start the school at the beginning of the grade, like your 6th to 8th grade, you start in 6, you can live anywhere in the county. So I wasn't a fan of the area of where we were staying, but the school is awesome. So, and he loves it too. So he's definitely going to be there through 8th grade. So we're good to go now. Yep. So,
you know how we started at loans and ended up talking about.
I was going to say, wait a minute, did you ask me a question about loans?
I did. That was me. I just took us off the plantation and put us out in left field.
We'll talk later, Mark. But
okay.
Okay. No, yeah, okay. But I was totally, Michele. I was totally in my mind. I'm thinking about all these students with thousands of dollars of loans.
No,
and that's not the question. So I'm just going to allow you to.
No, it was a great question. And the question was, how could it help you? And hopefully I showed how it can help. You know what I mean? Establishing credit history, establishing length of credit. Mm-hmm. Then there's also some things too. Like if you're going to have the loan, if you're going to have it, there's developing those habits and responsibility is important. There's a lot of people, believe it or not, that actually forget they have a loan. You can actually forget you have a loan because you don't really ever see it. It's not real until the payments come.
That is so scary. Oof.
But it's this isn't one of those things that I feel strongly about because I do understand the other side too. Like there's a peace of mind of just feeling like I don't owe anybody anything.
Right.
But you want to get your credit score up, establish a good length of on-time payments. Both of my kids got, like Karis has both of them, they have like really high credit scores partly by this and also because they've had a credit card for a long time. It was really like my credit card, but I have their own card for them. And so they got all the benefits of on-time payments. And so now they have their own credit cards. But when they wanted to apply for credit cards, like they got like, these really high end cards that you would think that people would have to have a long track and credit history to get, with all the mileage and all the bonuses and all the points. Like they have the like Capital One Venture cards, cards like that.
Mm-hmm.
And Karis has this other card that came with like $850 of free dollars because she had such a high credit score because of doing some of these things. So there's a method to the madness out there.
Right. And there it is.
There it is. Boom. Been wanting to say that for a long time.
You know
what I've been wanting to do? I found this out when I was with Dave the other day. Check this out. Hear that? Now I'm going to go crazy. All this time in Zencaster. I accidentally hit it. I'm like, what was that? I was like, I could have been using special effects.
Oh,
look,
God.
That's called dramatic piano. Okay. And then look, that one over there, ballpark.
Okay.
So now I'm going to be using special effects.
Michele, Lord. I'm
sorry. Michele. Sorry. Now Nick and I are kind of crazy. Everybody knows it already, so it is what it is. We're nuts. We
don't
know.
Use those. Oh my God.
I'll use them for the Dave section then.
There you go. Sorry, Dave.
All right. See ya, Nika.
See ya.
Okay, friends. I hope you enjoyed last week as Gil Villanueva introduced us to the University of Richmond. And this is our final segment with Gil. And here he talks about what Richmond can do to become an even better school. He also talks about a new initiative President Crutcher has. Gil talks about advice he gave his own daughter when it came to college, and it's advice he gives to all rising seniors about the college process. And then I put Gil on the hot seat, and he was ready for me. Parents, listen to the advice Gil has for parents. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
I can't ask you all softball questions, so I can't do that. So what does Richmond need to do to take its game to the next level and be even better?
Well, I think the university, like all schools, need to continue to grow, and not in size necessarily, but grow in terms of how it approaches the educational enterprise for all students. We want to make sure that all students are in a position to thrive in an inclusive environment. So our president, Dr. Ronald A. Crutcher, launched, along with many other leaders on campus, a strategic plan several years ago. And one of the big pillars is having a thriving and inclusive environment. And by that, I'm going to use the analogy that he often uses, which I can't get it. I can't say it any better than this. I don't think anyone can. Diversity is important, and diversity means you're being asked to go to the dance. However, inclusivity happens when someone is asking you to dance. So there's a fundamental difference there, and we want to make sure that all of our students, regardless of their interests, you could be a Division I athlete, you could be a musician, you could be X, Y, and Z, but we want to make sure that you have access to all that we have to offer, and you're not, hindered by anything. We want you, if this is something you wish to do, we want you to go after it. So I think the University of Richmond needs to continue to strive to achieve its goals. And I'd like to say that we're on our way. Each and every day, I see progress. It wasn't long ago that the university was really not very diverse, not just from a race or ethnic standpoint, but geographic. It wasn't as diverse from a religious standpoint, from a political standpoint. And I think it's amazing what the university has been able to do, in the last 10, 12 years.
Yeah, right around 2008 was when I really noticed a huge change, because the students I had go before that, they still had a good experience, but it felt like everybody was rich. It felt like to some kids, everybody was rich and they were driving fancy cars. Obviously, that's an overstatement.
Well, you're right. You're right.
But I know starting in 2008, because I remembered it because the global financial crisis was happening, and everybody else seemed like they were like struggling on the financial side. And Richmond was throwing out some seriously large offers to a lot of people. And we were like, I don't know where Richmond got this money, but Richmond is like coming with some heat. And we all noticed it. Like we were talking amongst, I was in Pennsylvania at the time. I was at Westtown. We were talking amongst ourselves, like in the greater Philadelphia area. Like Richmond is showing a real commitment to access and equity and inclusion. And I know, you had that former person that came over from the University of Virginia. And I heard rave reviews about him, the things he did on your campus. And then Crutcher, I keep hearing incredible things about Ronald Crutcher and his wife too. His wife gets involved in mentoring students. So I hear from from the students there about the role that she plays. So you guys are really doing some good things. And it's nice to see an organization sort of just change in a positive direction. I'm excited.
It all begins from the top, right? From the president to the board to the cabinet, but everyone plays a role and everyone is important. And I stress that to all of my colleagues on campus. And each and every year I thank them when the class is set in the summertime and in the beginning of the year. And we tell them that, if you stop doing what you're doing, we have nothing to talk about. And that includes alumni, right? So in the end, so I feel like excellence, breeds excellence, and we have to continue to grow. And the point earlier, when Ed Ayers came from Virginia, and now with Dr. Crutcher.
Yes, Ed Ayers. That's his name. Yes, Ed Ayers.
I think
he did a lot of good things for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we're really fortunate to have incredible leaders.
Hey, you got a Leadership Institute studies. You better back it up. So Gil, I just have one last question. I'm going to ask you, is there anything you haven't said that, you want to say? But what I want to throw out here, remember how we talked about, having you do like a Q&A with our listeners?
Sure.
Remember that? You said, yeah. And so, obviously we'll talk later and get the date and get on the calendar, but I thought it would be a really good chance to just say something about that. So, we don't need to get into too many details, but do you know how you'd want that to work? Would you want them to have a link, or would it be something on your website? They'd sign up there, or would you want me to put like do you do Zoom calls? What do you guys do in your office for stuff like that?
I think Zoom is probably the best, and you and I can figure out, when to do the Zoom. And I'm happy to do it. I think we talked about, I'm happy to do it at sort of after 5, maybe 6:30, so that, if parents want to chime in, they can join in. And I'm happy to do that, Mark. That'd be great.
Okay, great. So what I'll say, I'm going to announce it now, and I'll say we're obviously recording this, interview in advance, and I'll be, sharing the date by the time it airs. So, I'm just going to transition and say that now. Well, actually, you know what? I'll ask you the question, last question, anything you haven't shared, and then I'll say big announcement, pretty exciting. Actually, you know what? I'll say that at the very end. I'll do it at the very end, just in closing. I just wanted to talk it out with you a little bit first,
Sure.
So,
Thank you.
Yeah, because we have plenty of time to get the date on the calendar.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Scott Galloway is a professor of marketing at the New York University Stern School of Business. Scott has been the most articulate and scholarly defender of the perspective that higher ed is in dire straits, that the financial model is broken, and that a sizable number of colleges will not survive. Many of our listeners have asked, how can I know which colleges are truly in danger of not surviving? Galloway has taken a look at 436 colleges that U.S. News and World Report ranks. Prof. G has divided these colleges into 4 quadrants along 2 axes. He looks at low-value versus high-value colleges in terms of return on investment. He looks at colleges that have a low risk versus a high risk of surviving. Galloway has identified 88 colleges that are thriving and doing very well. He has identified another 128 that are surviving. He has identified 131 that are struggling. He has identified 88 colleges that he predicts will perish. Galloway's work is controversial, and the metrics he uses for his research are not gospel. But he makes a lot of very compelling points, and I want our listeners to be aware of his work. He amplifies so many of the themes that we talk about on this podcast, about the role of endowments and shrinking endowments, about declining state appropriations, about the unique challenge that rural schools face, about increased competition for education other than traditional four-year residential education. And he talks about the high-risk gamble colleges are taking by opening in the fall, but he talks about how their financial model necessitates that they bring in substantial revenue to stay afloat. The picture he presents is bleak, but in my opinion, Americans interested in higher education need the straight talk that Scott Galloway offers. The good news is you can hear from Scott himself. Prof G, as he is affectionately known as, will be doing a 1.5-hour live recording of his show on August 6th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where he will be discussing all of these issues and so much more. We will have a link in the show notes, so please attend. I know I've signed up, and I hope that you will join us. By the way, huge shout out to Natasha from California, one of our most dedicated listeners, and she's the one who let me know about this 90-minute free webinar. We will now return to my interview with Gil Villanueva for the University of Richmond.
All right, Gil. So we're about to wind down. Anything at all about the University of Richmond that you haven't shared that you want to share with our listeners before we call it a day?
Well, again, thanks for the opportunity, Mark, to speak to you and your listeners. And I know there's many of you out there. I'm going to go ahead and share something that I shared with my son and now sharing with my daughter as she's looking into colleges. So when my son was looking into schools, and one of the things that I asked him to do was, after you've accounted for your fit and match, right? Academic fit, social fit, all that good stuff. You've done your homework. Now you need to ask the question, what are students doing after graduation at these institutions? You want to account for the value proposition. The value proposition is basically what we've all talked about today. And that is, well, what's available to you that would add to your experience at these institutions that are above and beyond the classroom. All of the extra things, right? We talked about the Richmond Guarantee. We talked about research. We talked about all those things. And the value proposition, in my opinion, is always punctuated by outcomes. So you want to know, what are young people doing after graduation within 6 months to a year, right? Are they employed? They're in graduate school. You want to know perhaps where. You want to know if they're working, what type of jobs, what are their average salaries. If they're thinking about graduate school, what type of schools are they getting financial aid? So students, I want to encourage you to type in outcomes in the search boxes at all of these different colleges and universities and type that information, or career services. Then, you can go ahead and learn that and have some peace of mind. And trust me, your parents are going to be happy too that you did this research.
Well, that's a good segue into something that I tell students to do. And I haven't mentioned it on here in quite a few episodes. But I did it when we talked about what to do on a visit. I encourage students to visit the Career Center as part of their visit. And, whether they pop in, just extemporaneously pop in, or they maybe even try to set a meeting up with somebody ahead of time and sit down and ask those types of questions with career services. So you gave me one more opportunity to underscore that, which is great. So thanks for that, Gil.
You bet.
Fantastic. Now, I'm not letting you off without putting you on the hot seat. So I'm transitioning to the lightning round. So this is non-college stuff for the most part. So the first question for you is, what is your guilty pleasure? The food that you just cannot resist, even that it's not good for you.
Doritos.
What kind?
Traditional nacho cheese, and of course my Cool Ranch.
I have to tell you something really funny. So my wife put me on this 20-day vegan thing,
No.
Yeah, I listen, I just got off it. I went for a nice big steak, but I was on 20 days of vegan, and I'm like, okay, I can't have meat. I can't have dairy, and then she's like, you can't have Doritos either. And I was into the thing because I got some Doritos. So I did it for 20 days. I kept the faith, but man, a good steak never tasted so good when I got off that thing.
Oh man, good for you. Good for you.
And some Doritos too.
Hey man,
all right.
I got to live, right?
So there you go. What's your favorite TV show?
Oh my gosh, my favorite. I'll give you a couple. One is Bizarre Foods, and I will watch reruns of Bizarre Foods with Adam Zimmern forever. And then
I didn't know that show existed.
And really, any shows with cars in it. So, my God,
you're a car guy.
Counting Cars. I look at SOS, Cars. These are British shows. So I all these shows that have to do with cars. Because we're allowed to dream, right, Mark?
Yeah, I have two podcast partners, Anika and Dave. And Dave, man after his own heart, he's a total car guy. Our listeners always talking about how he wants to get a Tesla, but he can't do it because of his daughter's tuition. But he's an emergency medical doctor, so what he does do is, he travels, so he's on the road half the time, and so he treats himself to getting a really nice car when he rents his car. Every weekend flies in, so he'll be calling me and saying, "I'm driving this convertible or this Corvette." So yeah, it's a guy thing, I think.
I love it. Good for him.
If you weren't in admissions, what would you be doing, or what would appeal to you?
Oh my gosh, if I were not in admissions, I would be.
I'll broaden it. If you're not in education, because you could say I'll be college counseling.
Because I was going to do something.
You were going there, weren't you?
Yes, you got me. You got me on that one. So if I can't be in education at all,
yes,
I would be doing some kind of social related work, something to that effect, where I feel like I'm giving back to the community.
There you go.
I benefited from much, and I always feel that I have the responsibility to give a little bit back.
You got a big heart. What's the best book you've read in the last 5 years?
Oh my gosh. Probably In Defense of a Liberal Arts Education by Fareed Zakaria. I thought that was a really interesting book. As you know,
that would be. I would love to read that because I just know he's such a good critical thinker.
Well,
when I see him on CNN.
Oh, absolutely. The liberal arts education has come under attack in the last handful of years, and he really laid it out nicely and talked about, again, the benefits of liberal education.
Earlier, you gave fantastic advice for students about checking outcomes. My final question for you is, what's your best advice for parents?
Oh my gosh, parents, with all due respect, it is not about you. It is about your child. So, you want to put your ego aside. You want to put, all the whatever expectations you have. So it's good to have them, but understand that we're there to support. We're there to, be the cheerleaders. We're there to help and guide and all that good stuff. But in the end of the day, we had our turn. We had our opportunity. Now we want our students to take advantage of the process, have them learn from it, and let them own it. Let them own the college search process.
That's such great advice. And I think at some point I need to probably interview someone about how to do that, because it's also it's also easier said than done.
I agree. As a parent, yes.
As a parent, there's this just component particularly for people that are, kind of more middle class. If you're raised with just an expectation everybody goes to college, that's the kind of culture, then there's this thing, and somehow it just gets into our psyche as parents where you go to college is seen as somewhat of a reflection of your parenting. And you'll actually hear it in different groups. I'm attuned to this now. I'll hear so-and-so is going, a person will mention that their kid is going to such and such school, and that other parents will say, good job. And so like divorcing that and getting that detachment. So it's not about you. I think a lot of people know it, but I think they're in denial about it, and they also don't know how to implement it. So I think I might need to get an expert to come on and help us on that one. That's great advice. It's just doing it is the hard part.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Or not being in denial about it. So Gil, give the Richmond website to our listeners. Share it.
Well, the website is basically, richmond.edu. And we just launched a new, look for our website, brand new look and feel, and just click under admission and financial aid, undergraduate, and you're going to be there and you're going to learn more about admission, how it works at the University of Richmond. But I would just encourage everyone to kind of just poke around and look at the areas you're interested in and spend some time there. And certainly if you have any questions, I'm the only bald Asian man in the Office of Admission.
Well,
shoot me an email.
Well, that is a fantastic segue. I cannot thank Gil enough because we're going to try something. And if this works well, we'll do it for other schools as well. And Gil and I have been talking about this now in a few conversations. So Gil's going to have a special Zoom information session just for our listeners. All right. And I'll provide the login information. And this is a chance for you as a student, as a parent, as a college counselor to come in and meet the Asian bald guy with his 25 years experience and ask him any question at all. You can ask him about Richmond. You can ask him about stuff about admissions. And I just am very excited about this, that we'll turn around and take this podcast and turn it into an opportunity for you directly to talk to students, parents, and college counselors. So thank you so much for Gil. And thank you for doing this and just to show how good of a guy is. I said to Gil, Gil, do you want to just make it a general one and open it up to everybody, all your applicants? He's like, no, like if you want to do it just for your families, let's just do it for your families. So, you're the first one. You'll always be remembered as the first one to do this. So thanks, Gil, for that.
You're the best, man. Thank you for the opportunity, Mark.
Oh, you're welcome. And thanks for coming on the podcast. Take care, my friend.
You too. Stay strong. Take care.
Next week in the news, panicked universities in search of students are adding thousands of new majors. That's an article by John Marcus from the Hechinger Report. Mark and Anika will discuss, what is a departmental scholarship and how do I get one? Our question from a listener is from Carla from New York. And Mark, can you discuss relationship building for students in this time of COVID? Our interview was with Lisa Prescott, the Director of Admissions for UC Santa Barbara, who will be doing a two-part interview on admissions advice for foster care applicants. And our spotlight is the University of Denver.
So Dave, man, your travels, you were in North Carolina, which I know you love. That's one of your favorite spots.
Oh, I love North Carolina, man.
And believe it or not, we're recording in Chicago this time, something we never normally do.
North Carolina, then I have a week off in Chicago, and then I'm back to Connecticut.
And then back to Carolina. So I you know what? I'm just slowly working on recruiting you to come to the Southeast, my friend.
Well, it's a beautiful area of the country, let me tell you. And it's real easy to social distance while you're fishing. That's what I like. Yeah, you don't have to wear a mask while you're doing a little fly fishing. So that's a beautiful thing, let me tell you. But it's a great area of the country, that Smoky Mountain ridge that goes all the way from Virginia into Georgia. It is just one of my favorite drives, going from Atlanta into North Carolina. Love it.
With that convertible.
With the convertible, absolutely. I always get the upgrade.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. Your College Bound Kid is produced by Dave Vasaya of podcastengineers.com. If you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that can really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Our image editor is Tauha Khan. Webmaster is Stalianos Dimitru. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And if you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340. And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like to ask us, and we'll include them on the show, you can just email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions. So send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.